Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April 23rd edition of the Scientific Governance and Risk Meeting. My name is Richard Brown. I am the head of community development at MakerDAO, and not for much longer. I am also the interim governance facilitator. We have some exciting developments in that camp. I encourage everybody to head up to the forums and take a look at LongForWisdom's post. I proposed the addition of a new governance facilitator last week, maybe it was the week before. I'm not sure anymore. But very exciting things are happening. So there's going to be some new additions. And it also ties into another theme that we're going to be discussing today about empowered actors in the ecosystem. We have two new empowered actors that Charles will be introducing us to later on in the schedule, as well as he will also be walking us through MIPS again, because MIPS are very, very, very important, and it's critical that this group and our protocol in general begins to internalize the implications of it, what it's going to look like, how it's going to be implemented, what it takes, what it requires to get involved with that process, and when. Calendaring is always a huge thing as well. Not the sexiest thing in the world, but critically important, and he'll talk about that for a bit. LongForWisdom will give us governance at a glance. How hard could that be? I don't think there's much governance happening this week, so that should be super fast to crank through that one. We also, and this is very exciting, Lev is here. Lev is here. It's so exciting. And Lev is going to talk to us about WBTC and a post that he put into the forums. Actually, I'm not going to editorialize about WBTC. It's a fascinating project, and obviously Bitcoins on the Ethereum blockchain will change everything. So this is really interesting developments. Cyrus is going to tell us about risk and collateral. I won't be any more specific than that. I'll leave it to Cyrus to create some clarity, and then Vishesh will be here to give us the state of the pegs, and we'll walk through that a bit. I want to talk about, or I want to hit a beat that I've been hitting every call for the last 2 months, possibly. Let's call it a month. And that beat is, I've been refining my memes as the calls progress. The new meme is now the path from intention to implementation. And that's what we need to think about. So MakerDAO, Maker Foundation, the community, the ecosystem, we've all aligned over the last couple of years to build a very sophisticated, very cool protocol that supports the DeFi space. In order to do that, requires a great deal of work, lots and lots and lots of work, and time and energy and money. And as we become more and more successful and more sophisticated, the amount of work and coordination that it takes to do that increases. And let's add some more complexity to that picture. Why not? We're also externally driven, which means that we're designed to be decentralized. It's not branding. That's the core mission. We need to rapidly expand our operations outside of the firewall at the foundation. That means that we're identifying empowered actors, we're identifying groups of stakeholders and giving them what they need to begin to drive the bus for us and control their own levers and ultimately take control of the protocol and their own destinies. Let's get dramatic. So in order to do that, that requires operational overhead, it requires coordination, it requires communication, it requires governance, it requires humans interacting with other humans. This is a learning process for all of us. And as we begin to expose more and more hooks into the protocol and hand off that decision-making process, there's going to be some learning experiences. And some of those, the one that I want to talk about particularly, well, maybe I'll talk about two, depending on how much energy I have. But so the first one I want to talk about, though, is that there's the community and the ecosystem, the governance community as well, signals its intention. And we have tools to capture intention. In the forum, we have forum polls, we have forum threads, we have the portal, we have polls in the portal, we have votes in the portal. And that guides the direction of of everybody else involved in this process. What we need to do very soon is to begin differentiating between intention and implementation, because wanting to do something, and this is, I'm preaching to the converted here because this is a sophisticated group of individuals, and we all have, presumably, we all have very, very complicated jobs. And in those jobs, when something needs to be done, stakeholders need to be identified, plans need to be made, people need to sign off, developers, PR people, content writers, smart contracts need to be developed, auditors need to be brought to the table. There's nothing is simple in this world, and so the path from intending to do something to actually doing that thing can be complicated. And right now we have a system where we signal intentions, and recently we've seen some examples of intentions that had dates associated with them, and those dates went into the system before any sort of feasibility or plan was associated with them. And so we're running into situations where the community wants something to happen, picks a date for that thing to happen, and then we have to go back and try to figure out whether it's possible for that to happen, and that's backwards. We also have, let me touch on the second point that I wasn't going to get too deeply into, but there's also, in the absence of that type of prior planning, it's impossible to judge bandwidth and appropriately determine scope. And when you don't have those two things, it's very, very easy to begin a flywheel process where intention comes into the system, but implementation cannot come out of the system. And figuring out that you've hit that point frequently occurs after it's too late. So we're in a situation right now, and let's see if I can list them all off the top of my head. Right now we have a few things on the go. We have a little thing called SED shutdown. We have the Collateral compensation group that's working in the community. We have the dark fix. We have the GSM. We have Collateral onboarding. We have the introduction of the MIPS process. We have as of 11 minutes ago, we had 10 separate polls in the polling system from 1 week. And we're looking at more next week. It's my contention that we were already sort of stressed as far as our cognitive load goes, our ability to process new ideas and identify all the threads and all the projects in motion weeks ago. And now things are busier. So that places us into a situation where we need to optimize process and understand how we can start attacking these problems we have in the ecosystem, or these challenges, or these new issues that we want to address in a more considered and deliberate manner. That is my segue, because we have a solution to this problem, and the solution is a framework called the MIPS process. I'd like to encourage everyone to internalize the fact that MIPS are a thing and that MIPS are going to be implemented soon, and I would love for people to take some of their copious free time and head into the forums and start reviewing some of these things. Because if you're interested in moving the protocol, if you're interested in becoming more engaged, if you have skin in this game, if you have collateral types that you want to see introduced, this is the path to do that. So I'm not going to get too deeply into it because that's Charles's jam and I don't want to steal his thunder. So Charles will talk about that a bit in the call. But here's my caution. Everybody internalize that and know that it's coming. So in early May, the format of these calls is going to change radically. We'll have new people assuming new responsibilities, and we'll have a more formalized process. And so if you want to be prepared for that, you're going to need to do some research, I think. All right, I think I'm going to leave it there. Just as usual, some generalized cautions. I'll allow it to percolate a bit. So complaints about my audio. Is it better now? Worse? Better? Thumbs up, thumbs down, louder. All right, well, I'll assume it's better because somebody said gain and I turned up the gain on my mic, so that's obviously problem solved. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to LongForWisdom, and after Long, we'll hear from Charles. Long, do you have governance at a glance for us?
Yes. 1 moment.
Cool.
Cool. All right, I think this is going to be mostly covering things people in this meeting are already aware of, but I'll skip through some things. Cool, so active discussions. Obviously the major one of these was the post from Parify a few days ago, where they posted a fairly robust argument in support of taking action to address the DAI price disparity from the peg. Obviously that prompted a lot of activity. There's a lot of discussion going on that thread. If you're unaware of what's going on, I'd suggest reading that thread and yeah, getting involved. Second one was the Rich's whole "It's time for a second governance facilitator" thread. I've now responded to that thread. If people are interested in reading what I wrote, then go there and read, I guess. Just sort of again, like ringing the same bell, Rich, is that the MIPS are still a thing, and discussions.
Sorry to interrupt. Did you accept the position? Just don't leave us hanging.
I said I would be willing to do it if I'm ratified. Yes.
Cool.
Begrudging willingness that makes you most qualified for the position. So
yeah, I also
excited about it. I'll know I made a mistake.
Yeah, I wrote a very big post saying like all the reasons, like it's rubbish. Well, not rubbish, but like all the reasons or other things that we need to consider as well. But yeah. Cool. Yeah. Sorry. So back to that. So MIPS, yeah, MIPS is still a thing. There's like a thread for each MIP. Discussion continues in many of them. We had a meeting the other day with run by Lucas, I think, of Centrifuge, where we discussed some of the MIPS info. There's a thread about that on the forum as well, and a link to the video, to the recording of that discussion. Cool. All right, so seeking consensus-wise, signal requests, the main two that sort of came directly from the forum are the calibrating the GSM delay. This is currently on chain. We're voting whether to change the GSM delay to 12 hours or 24 hours, or whether to include a 12-hour or 24-hour change into the next executive. Then we're also, so the polling is now finished on the grace period between the SCD shutdown spell and the actual emergency shutdown of SCD, or global settlement of SCD. And I believe that will not go on chain separately and will just be included in the executive when we come to shutdown. And yeah, just a sort of a general reminder, as Rich said, there are like 10 on-chain polls, which I think have finished now. Yeah, so I guess if you should have voted in those if you wanted to. Timing-wise, it's a little bit awkward. But yeah, as Rich said, there's probably gonna be more next week. So yeah. All right, I think that's me done.
Okay, Charles, I think it's off to you. If you want to let us know about recent developments in the MIPS world.
Yeah. So I've been putting together a calendar diagram that I will share on the forums. I'm not quite done yet, but I will verbally communicate it here. So the current request for comment stage is still ongoing until the timing vote occurs on the 27th. What that means is people can go in and make suggestions for the MIP authors to take into account. This includes for the 13 initial MIPS as well as the 2 new sub-proposals that were proposed yesterday. The first one is my proposal to get myself ratified as the MIP editor, and the second one is the smart contract domain team sub-proposal to get them onboarded and ratified as well. So I'm going to share those here, and I will briefly go over them after I walk through the timeline, but just in case you want to look at it before. They're in the chat. Okay.
Can you give a brief description about what each role is all about and what their responsibilities will be?
Yeah. So as a MIP editor, there will be more in the future, but as the first one, I will support and enforce the administrative and editorial aspects of the overall MIPS process. So getting them onboarded to the governance cycle, making sure that proposals are formatted correctly and there's no missing information. And the full list is actually described in MIP 0 in the component 10, which basically describes that the MIP editors are responsible for maintaining and managing the future MIPS.MakerDAO site, which mirrors the GitHub, which has not yet formally been created. Provide feedback and have discussions with MIPS sections on basically the forums. So that's anything kind of shepherding the process for MIPS 6 proposals, making sure that people know where to go and how to get their ideas out there, processing those MIPS, the management and organization of the MIP and sub-proposal preambles. So that's changing the statuses throughout their life cycles, making sure the authors and contributors are listed, updating the dates on the ratification or proposals. The MIP editors will also be in charge with onboarding the next MIP editors or replacing them as well. So in terms of what some of the tasks are for enforcing the MIPS framework, you basically would be working to confirm the title accurately, describes a proposal, making sure it has the correct labels and tags, assigning the formal MIP number as it goes through the MIP cycle, changing the statuses, making sure it's in the right category, and all these kind of things. And lastly, working with the governance facilitators on coordinating governance and executive votes in relation to MIPS and getting them into the governance cycle. As for the smart contract team, I don't know, Mariana might want to speak more to that, but his proposal highlights what they've done in the past. I mean, it's the Foundation Smart Contracts team. Everyone knows them on this call. They'll be working particularly on collateral onboarding as we kick that off with building the collateral adapters and deploying the other necessary smart contracts like the Ionizer and Oracle Security Module. Mariana, I'm not sure if you want to speak more to your application, but I can keep going.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Cool. No, I'll just keep a quick overview. Mostly everything is on the actual document. This is just pretty much a formal step to take because of the MIPS process. We will continue to be doing what we've been doing all along and into the near future. Not just collateral onboarding, but when things need to be done, executive spells, the thing we had with the debt auctions that needed to be fixed. And, I like to say that we're building on a very immutable blockchain that changes every 3 to 6 months via hard forks. That needs to be taken into account as well, so we can make sure that the protocol continues to run correctly as Ethereum grows. And yeah, that's all I'll say. You can find the rest on the forum, unless anybody has any questions.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, you can ask now. Otherwise, I'll go into the update on the timeline for the MIPS votes. All right, so no questions. So as I mentioned before, the request for comment stage where people from the community can make comments or suggest any changes ends, ideally it'd end the day before the timing vote, so on the 26th. Then on the 27th is when the community makes the decision on whether to proceed with the ratification vote of the initial 13 MIPS and those 2 sub-proposals, or delay ratification for 1 month. Now, if they do decide to change or delay the ratification for 1 month, this allows for competing proposals to be submitted by the community, and this would change the timeline for the actual ratification of the MIPS. So in that case, the deadline for submitting the competing proposals would be on May 20th. And then there would be another vote where the community would come in and select the final individual MIPS to create the bespoke MIPS sets. And that would occur on May 23rd to May 26th. And then in this case, the governance ratification vote would occur May 27th to May 30th, and effectively resulting in the governance cycle beginning on June 1st. So if we do decide to proceed with the ratification vote of the 13 initial MIPS and the 2 sub-proposals, the governance ratification vote will occur on May 1st and May 4th, and the governance cycle would then begin on May 4th itself. So in terms of what can happen now until the governance cycle begins, and as you've seen, MIPS 6 forms can start to be proposed and reviewed in the forums for collateral types to be added in the future. But note that they won't be officially valid until the ratification vote passes, but that shouldn't stop any feedback in the processing period from happening. That can go on throughout the process. And in terms of actually getting the collateral onboarding process kickstarted once the governance cycle is in place on May 4th, the collateral types can be formally submitted to the governance cycle on May 4th itself to the 6th, which means that MIP 12 submissions, so that follow the MIP 6 collateral type, can occur during this period of time. So the MIP 12 is basically the requirements from the risk team, the oracles team, and the smart contracts team laid out. So in this case, the smart contract team and the oracles teams will lay out exactly what they need to do in terms of the requirements for getting that collateral type added, and it will be submitted in a MIP 12 submission by either the person who submitted the MIP 6 by communicating with the domain teams, or by one of the domain teams submitting it. So as I mentioned, I will finish up this diagram highlighting everything I just described, but that's pretty much the updated timeline for everything MIPS that's going to be happening over the next couple of weeks. So if there are any questions, I can answer them now.
All right, it doesn't sound like any are coming. If people have questions though, put the curriculum later on, type it in the sidebar, or join the forum posts, please, so they're recorded for all time. Lev, I think you're up. You want to walk us through the WBTC RFC?
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
So I'm going to talk about the WBTC RFC that I made yesterday. I'm going to start by posting it in here in the chat so that anyone can check it. So I'll be brief, and then we'll have a chance to maybe ask some people there for their contributions or ask questions about it. The context of this is the discussion that's been going on already for a couple of days. It started with the forum post called Action Required State of the Peg, which is discussing the sustained premium that DAI has had on the marketplace for basically ever since the 12th of March. So I'm not going to address kind of the context that makes this necessary, but one of the main strategies that are under discussion there are about adding more adding collateral types that are likely to result in DAI issuance and create supply to put down the pressure on the price and normalize it and kind of demonstrate that governance has things under control. So for this, I'd like to propose WBTC as such a collateral type to be considered in this kind of emergency context, which implicitly means that it's sort of skipping through some of the process that's currently kind of being created for proper collateral onboarding, similarly to the other collateral types that are being discussed in this emergency context. However, to be able to propose anything, I kind of felt the need to quickly throw together some kind of framework, which and I'm willing to take suggestions on what this framework should look like, but basically it consists of these 3 questions, which I'll quickly go through now. The first question is, is the collateral that you're considering in principle an asset that one day should be added to MCD with some choice of risk parameters? The importance of this question is I think we'd all agree that in an emergency, even as an emergency measure, we wouldn't be fast tracking some collateral that we, in good faith, don't expect would ever have been collateral under normal circumstances. It's pretty clear that that's quite far out of the window of what we should be considering. The second question is, do we think that adding this collateral, in the very near future with some reasonable choice of risk parameters actually lead to DAI issuance in material quantities that would affect the price of DAI on the market? And the last question is, if the answer to the above questions is yes, then what are the risk parameters that we should use while making sure that we're conservative enough in protecting the system while we're having to make these decisions on an accelerated timescale. So I can go through answering these three questions from my point of view, which I think indicate that WBTC is a very strong choice of collateral to be added in this context. The answer to the first question about adding WBTC in general is basically that custodial solutions for putting assets like BTC onto Ethereum are basically one of the main ways that you could get exposure to Bitcoin through on Ethereum and on MakerDAO. There are other solutions that are also people are working on that are kind of more technically sophisticated and have some trade-offs, but I think over time it's become pretty clear that this custodial solution is one of the main ones. And the question of whether or not tapping into BTC as collateral in general, I think almost everyone would agree that that's definitely something that we want, because the BTC lending markets and BTC trading, financing, derivatives, and so on are just really, really huge markets, even compared to ETH. So there's really nothing bigger than BTC when it comes to cryptocurrency. And I gave some numbers there in my post, but basically, if you look at sort of Bitcoin derivatives, futures and swaps and stuff like that, then you'll see that open interest for those products is probably over 5 times that of ETH, and ETH coming in at number 2. And ETH is our kind of number 1 asset right now. So we clearly that clearly indicates that there's really a lot more potential with BTC. And likewise, the lending market for BTC is also much bigger. So when it comes to leverage seekers, which are people who will issue DAI, there's maybe heuristically like five BTC leverage seekers for every ETH leverage seeker. So clearly, we will want WBTC at some point. Kind of going into the point number 2 of whether or not we think that we could actually realistically see enough DAI created against WBTC. I believe there's a good chance that we will, and I have 3 points there. So first is what I was just referring to, so that the massive size of the BTC lending market and margin trading and derivatives markets, even relative to ETH, there's really no other asset in cryptocurrency that comes close. So there's been other assets under discussion, and it's for those assets it's very hard to make the case that they could come anywhere close to ETH in terms of how much demand there would be for minting DAI, and BTC is the only exception to that. The second point is really about rates arbitrage. So we have the ability through monetary policy to set very low rates in order to encourage DAI creation, right? And whenever you do that, you're always opening up an opportunity for someone who's currently borrowing against BTC at higher rates. You're creating the opportunity to refinance there. And I think that basically if we choose the rates correctly, there will just be a lot of people out there who have outstanding debt against BTC, and then it's just a question of how well will they be able to access CDPs and how well will they be able to access WBTC. But the demand is kind of necessarily there. And the last one has been speaking to traders, lenders, desks, and so on who deal with BTC, and I've just seen a very positive response, both specifically about WBTC as a vehicle, and also just in general about being able to refinance BTC collateralized debt using CDPs were that to become available. And the third point, I proposed some risk parameters for discussion, and I think the most important thing there is to kind of carry over as much as we know from ETH, because the BTC market isn't that different. Choose a stability fee that will make sure that refinancing is actually still attractive. So we have to be very, very competitive to existing lending markets. And lastly is to make sure that we do manage the uncertainty, custodian risk, and just in general the uncertainty from having gone through this accelerated process with the conservative choice of debt ceiling. Not to overextend ourselves there, and basically just choose a debt ceiling that we would be very happy to see it filled up, and we think that would help materially help the peg, but not go too far because of kind of the constraints on the process right now. And that's about it. And then I would like to have an opportunity to have a discussion and hear some questions about this. And I've also got there's a couple of people on this call who are from the WBTC and lending communities who might be able to answer some of those questions or have something to say. So I think Kirash is here from BitGo. BitGo is the custodian of WBTC. And we also have Matt from CoinList, who's a lending desk that is also one of the largest WBTC market makers. So I'd like to turn it over now to anyone who has questions about this RFC.
Great. Apologies for the noise in the background. You mentioned in the chat that you guys run an 8 of 11 multi-sig wallet to add any potential market makers into, or custodians, I forget the terminology that you use, but that currently there is a smaller subset, including Kyber, Airswap, and 2 others that are actually running that wallet and who can redeem Bitcoin for ETH. Could you perhaps talk a little bit more about that?
Hey, Kia, are you there?
Yeah, Ben, do you want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So we have multiple roles in our ecosystem, and the people that can do redeems and mints, we call them merchants. And you can view a list of them on the site, like wbtc.network. It's actually not just a few; it's quite a handful of them. But we actually see that CoinList has been really, very instrumental in setting up like a portal to do one-to-one mapping that we think is far better than going through a merchant today, and I think that's quite hopeful. So maybe Matt from CoinList can explain a bit more there.
Yeah, sure. So thanks, Ben. The idea that that we had a couple of months ago was that the WBTC minting and redeeming process has been optimized for institutionals. BitGo decided to go with a merchant model where only KYC entities onboarded via the DAO would be able to access WBTC. However, that was designed, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, really with the optics that those merchants would mint large quantities of WBTC and then make it available to their final users via either an order book like Kyber or DDEX or Diversify, or via a wrapping, unwrapping functionality, which is exactly what CoinList has put in place. So, of course, these platforms, Kyber, Extra, they support WBTC, but they do many other things. So they haven't necessarily optimized for user friendliness specifically on that asset, as they've been very successfully running other initiatives. So CoinList was in a unique position to simplify the whole process for retail users because we have access to extremely cheap BTC funding, uncollateralized. So we essentially minted a large portion of WBTC, about 25% of the overall WBTC issuance has been minted by CoinList, and then was made available to market makers and retail users. So that at the moment, anyone who would want to access the asset simply need to create an account at CoinList, for example, and hit wrap button, paying a small fee, either a fixed fee of 25 bips for retail users or a decreasing fee for entities trading with us. So of course you might think, well, only CoinList is doing this. So what if CoinList disappears or goes away or pulls the plug on the asset? Now what we've seen is that that business of providing liquidity of an asset without any market risk attached to it, of course, because all trades are BTC versus WBTC or vice versa. So there is no actual market risk or credit risk involved in the loans. There is no margin calls, of course. The assets are pegged one-to-one. If we are doing it and being profitable with that business, it's going to attract other counterparties. It's going to attract other market makers supporting that same exact functionality, and the fees are going to be driven down. So overall, this is only the start for this asset and for this access. And having Maker allowing WBTC as an asset will only bring more limelight to this part of the ecosystem and really bridging in a very efficient manner the BTC world and penetration in retail's crypto portfolios with DeFi and what Maker is trying to achieve.
I can throw a bit of a curveball here, so forgive me for this. WBTC, Bitcoin tokenized on the Ethereum blockchain is sort of the holy grail, and we've all, well, no, I shouldn't speak for other people. I've anxiously been waiting for it for a a long time now, and WBTC has been out for a while now. You spoke to one of the issues you faced, or maybe a solution to one of the adoption issues you faced with encouraging retail users to get involved. But can you speak to some of the other reasons why you think that WBTC didn't explode out of the gate? Like, what are some of the challenges to adoption that you've seen so far in acquiring liquidity? Because I'm looking at the network has 1,000 BTC right now. Is that correct?
To be honest, my perspective is that WBTC is not a HODL coin. If you want to, hold Bitcoin, there's no point of getting WBTC. So if you're getting it, you want to do things with it, such as use it in financial applications. So the demand is partially generated from those financial applications supporting WBTC. And that has been growing, and it's a snowball effect with, market makers coming along, new applications supporting it, and we've seen this growth. And I think actually a big part of it, I think Akash brought up this point, is the biggest use case for WBTC is Maker.
Well, that's something that I've been trying to wrap my head around as well. I'll say it again. I'm not a sophisticated financial thinker, but so there's some part of me that wonders, is there some circular risk going on where the use case, the success, or I shouldn't say that, that's overstating things. So a rapid adoption of WBTC would be spurred by its addition to being used as a collateral type in Maker, but we have to add it as a collateral type in Maker to increase the adoption of WBTC. So potentially the protocol becomes a significant factor in that success of the token, right? Is there some kind of circular dependencies here that should be concerning to us?
Well, the way I see it is, I think it's very important to keep things reasonable with the choice of debt ceiling, which is, in particular to make sure that, we don't end up in a situation where WBTC has growing pains where we've essentially, allowed it to be used in Maker to such an extent that, it basically kind of, the rest of the infrastructure can't keep up, and then, something might start to strain on the create redeem process or in liquidity or somewhere else. That's why I think that, that's why I kind of would if we were considering it as an emergency collateral type rather than a collateral type through the MIPS process later, I would choose basically, a debt ceiling where we thought we would make a material impact on the peg, just like with any one of these emergency assets, but one which still is not going to involve, the WBTC supply going up, 10x as a result, and having it all, 90% of it in Maker or anything like that. And I think, a debt ceiling kind of in the 5 to 10 million DAI range would be neither of those things. The other thing to consider is kind of with the existing use of WBTC is that, the two largest lending markets, Maker is by far the largest on DeFi, the largest lending markets on DeFi, Maker, and the second one, Compound. Neither of those support WBTC collateral. Some smaller ones, like newer ones like Aave, do allow you to borrow against WBTC, but to a large extent, it hasn't really had this this adoption. I think because it hasn't had a chance in one of these, in one of the larger applications.
All right, yeah, thanks for that. Makes sense.
I wanted to ask one thing about, how to move forward with this RFC, and I would like to hear the community's view, which is that, essentially, I think it would be nice to have a poll in the forum about some of these questions concerning WBTC. There's obviously also been polls in the context of the state of the peg emergency situation, but like, essentially, what is the information that we kind of want to tease out about from sentiment? Is it essentially the answers to these kind of three questions? Does it, who agrees and disagrees about WBTC being a viable asset and being a helpful asset in this emergency, and what people think about the risk parameters? Or is there some other thing that we should try to gauge?
Well, Cyrus, you have been sort of shepherding the forum thread and the collateral type polling so far. So how does this fit into that model?
That's a kind of an open question, to be honest. I mean, this is somewhat of a unprecedented situation. that we're in. So as far as emergency measures go and trying to help save the peg, I mean, we just do due diligence up to the point that we can, and then take it from there. In terms of forum threads and governance pools, I think we can figure that stuff out offline. I don't really think we have a clear understanding of what that would look like as of right now. We still have to hear from the engineering team about timelines and feasibility of turnaround time for adding a new collateral type such as wrapped Bitcoin. May take a few days up to a few weeks. So depending on that process, we would structure the forum polls and the governance polls differently, I would imagine, based on the amount of time we have. Short answer is I don't know right now, but we'll be monitoring and help facilitate the process as we get more information.
I can speak to that later, but I would say one of my concerns is there going to be enough market makers to bid on liquidations of WBTC should they happen? Because
I was just looking at that myself, Mariani. It looks like on DEXs there's about 50 BTC of liquidity before you get massive slippage on DEXs right now for WBTC.
So there's liquidity issues, but there's also the turnaround issue, isn't there? Because there's a process involved where, I'm completely ignorant of the process. So my assumption is that there is some kind of redemption process, which is different than the way that the auctions are designed right now, where we're expecting in sort of a short period of time, liquidity is available. Is there going to be an issue with the way that redemption works with WBTC?
So right now, talking about minting, you could get, if you're an onboarding entity, like many people on these calls are with CoinList, you could get 105 WBTC in your wallet in about 2 minutes, maybe less, automatically 24/7 without any human involvement. 105 is nice. This pool will grow as the market grows, and if Maker onboards this as a collateral, it would undoubtedly grow. It can grow to 500 or 1,000 WBTC in a few days. There is really no limit to how much Bitcoin we can source. Burning is exactly the same thing. It's actually even faster, probably a few seconds. You would send us WBTC, we redeem it for BTC. That's just us. Other people will do that as the market grows.
There needs to be some kind of an oracle for that, though, right? Like we can't allow the debt ceiling to exceed the amount of liquidity that's available. So how is that measured, or how is that allocated, I think?
Lev, you want to speak to that specifically?
Sure. Yeah, I think it's important to understand how especially redemption, because that's the relevant part for liquidating collateral. Because when you're liquidating collateral, you're only ever buying, the liquidator's buying WBTC for DAI. As Matt explained, CoinList is a very active liquidity provider there, but they're not the only one. So in fact, really, anyone can go through KYC, if you're a trading firm or market maker with the WBTC DAO, and then be allowed to redeem WBTC from BitGo directly. And the amount of WBTC that's redeemable there is the entire supply of WBTC. It's all backed one-to-one, obviously, with Bitcoins, and you could redeem all of it if you wanted to. I mean, maybe someone from BitGo can confirm, but I would definitely assume that that's the case. But there's also people like CoinList who are providing the service of essentially faster turnaround, and also exposing this functionality to any retail user who has basically set up an account with CoinList. So in that sense, I think it's very similar to the process with USDC. So you can also ask with USDC, how do you redeem that for USD? And certainly anyone who has an account with Coinbase would be familiar with how there's this button on Coinbase basically that just converts your USDC to USD in any amount that you desire. And I think so in that sense, kind of the analogy there is that CoinList is like Coinbase, and Center, the company that issues USDC, is like BitGo.
So I have a question: Is the CoinList custody different than the Bitcoin custody? Do they have their own separate?
So to be clear, so CoinList isn't a custodian. CoinList is just a liquidity provider that essentially, stands up in front of any retail user and says, "I'll exchange your WBTC with for BTC or vice versa." The only custodian of WBTC today is BitGo, I believe. Does that make sense?
Can the BitGo people chime in on on any insurance coverage that you guys have regarding the deposits? And I think you guys have some docs as well that maybe you can share later in the forums as well. But maybe talk a little bit about what would happen in case of hacks or bankruptcies or any other such situations.
Sure, yeah. It's actually one of the most comprehensive crypto insurance policies in the industry, and I think it was the first one as well. Every cold storage BitGo wallet is insured up to 100 million. And of course, you don't leave more than 100 million in a wallet. And I'll be happy to share some docs. And there's obviously a route to very cheaply increase that insurance policy as well.
Who's providing the insurance?
It's Lloyd's underwriters. And just to echo what Lev mentioned earlier, if you run into the same issue, you need to get rid of a lot of USDC. You don't necessarily always interact with Center. You go through Coinbase, and if Coinbase needs their buffer zone isn't enough, then they will interact with Center. And the timelines in terms of Coinbase interacting with Center is very much the same as CoinList interacting with BitGo. And because there's no wiring actually, because the USDC money is wired to Center, because of that, it's actually faster. And not every WBTC that ends up on Maker is gonna come through us. These merchants, its system is designed in this way for these liquidity providers to be independent of the custodian.
Hi, this is Ben Chan. I can confirm that basically that's right. So the idea here is that BitGo we have all the BTC behind WBTC. It's publicly auditable. You can check the site for it, and we actually do pretty regular scheduled audits like every month. The reason why I think CoinList is stepping in here and they're so valuable is because a good amount of the WBTC is held in cold storage, and so just like Circle probably has some certain amounts of time that you need to take to redeem USDC. There, we would not be best to target for retail in terms of the amount of delays that it would take to redeem WBTC with us, but merchants can do that with no problem. And it's a balanced trade-off that we make for security purposes because of the cold wallets.
I just want to say one thing. This is Joe Q from doing the proprietary trading unit for Maker. We are making markets in WBTC on Oasis, which is not doing that much, but we were the first ones to put WBTC in size onto Uniswap. I'm all for putting all sorts of Bitcoin on there besides WBTC, REN, TBTC. I think that Lev pushing for this is a great idea, and we should do it. But it comes down to what Mariano said. We need people, and this is across the board as we add collateral types, to be there for auction collaterals when it happens. Now, another 6 hours, so it's fine. But as we grow the system, we need more and more people to participate in that. That's all I wanted to add.
I was going to say, presumably the merchants, the liquidity providers that were mentioned, like they're incentivized to act as keepers as well, right? If they can get WBTC for less than the price of like Bitcoin, they can just take it and swap it or do whatever. Is that correct?
I'd say so. This is Ben from BitGo. I would do it if I were a keeper or a merchant. In fact, I mean, Bitcoin arguably is one of the more stable crypto assets, you know, compared to many other assets.
Would any of you guys be willing to commit to running a keeper for WBTC?
I mean, that's a pretty large monetary commitment. I don't know if that's a fair thing to ask someone.
I mean, I'm definitely aware of people in the space who are involved with these kinds of things. I think like we can take this discussion further, but I don't think it'd be that hard to get an indication of interest for that.
Just thinking about the round trip cycle for keepers, even if you had an easy link between wrapped Bitcoin and Bitcoin, easy redemption or whatnot, going from Bitcoin back into DAI is still somewhat of a challenge in the space. So it's definitely a more involved process than bidding on ETH.
So I kind of disagree with that. I mean, let's just go through this process. So you start with DAI, and for the merchants, you know, like if we handed them the GUI, because the auctions now are like 6 hours, if you just handed them the manual GUI where they could, you know, bid a reasonable price, and I'm saying it would be great if they're running a keeper, but if that's too much, like even the manual GUI would help. So they bid with some DAI, they win the WBTC, right? They convert it through a couple of mechanisms now, either CoinList or through the redemption process through BitCode. They get BTC, they go to Coinbase, let's say, sell that BTC for USD, which they can easily convert to USDC. They can bring that USDC back to MakerDAO, mint DAI. Again, this would, you know, if we're talking about kind of a stressful situation, they bring that USDC mint DAI through MakerDAO, and they're back to DAI again.
There's also a USDC DAI market on Coinbase, which they could use.
Right, but a couple of things. I mean, one is you have much longer confirmation times with Bitcoin when you're sending it to Coinbase. So that's probably an additional hour right there. And then, I mean, that just still doesn't, you know, in the best case, which, okay, maybe this isn't too common, but if you buy ETH in an auction, you can just flip it straight back into DAI from Oasis or Uniswap. Whereas with wrapped BTC, if you don't have that wrapped BTC liquidity on the DEXs, which, well, we don't have that liquidity today, then you have to go through the process you just described. Like you don't even have the option of maybe doing a quicker round trip.
The thing is, you can hedge with BTC DAI or BTC USDC. You don't need WBTC because it's 1-to-1, it's guaranteed. So
yeah, but the key is that for us, we want to end up in a position where the keepers have DAI in their hands again for subsequent auctions. That's really when the cycle ends.
Right, but then they can just hedge the price exposure with whatever they like, and then come, you know, it can be diversified, it can be Kyber, can be CoinList to recycle and get DAI in their hands again.
Would they not just go buy DAI on Coinbase?
Right. So it's not the price exposure. Well, I mean, the price exposure is one thing, but it's not only the price exposure. We actually need keepers to have physical DAI in their hands so that they could bid on subsequent rounds of auctions. So hedging the price exposure wouldn't help in that sense. And going to Coinbase to buy DAI would involve sending the Bitcoin to Coinbase, which, as I said, is just slightly longer process than ETH, at least just speaking purely from confirmation times.
Yeah, I think Cyrus, I think you have a good point there, especially about the confirmation time. So like indeed, I think for you know, the average wait time on a Coinbase deposit is higher for BTC than it is for ETH. And I think, yeah, just to kind of, you know, elaborate for what other for other people is like, I think, you know, Cyrus is talking about kind of a situation where you basically need to go full circle without any kind of external financing, right? So obviously, if you have a keeper who has access to financing, who has enough capital, then you know the keeper doesn't need to go full circle in order to liquidate something, right? So like, you know, just as they're buying one batch of WBTC and starting that process, they can already be buying more DAI with, you know, with cash that they have, you know, anywhere, and keep going. It's just a question of, you know, indeed, you know, in situations like Black Thursday, we did see the strain on the whole system where, you know, keepers were running out of capital. They didn't have access to DAI in the time available. And it turned out that even with ETH, basically, you know, you just couldn't get enough DAI liquidity in, you know, 10 minutes or whatever that, you know, very, very short window was, which is why it's so important that these auction parameters have also changed now to accommodate that. And I think that, you know, with where they are now, it's much more sensible for you know, for any asset. And I think, you know, I hopefully it should be doable. The other thing that I wanted to mention that hasn't been brought up yet is that Diversify is a DEX that is also a WBTC merchant, and they're also really pushing for WBTC as a way of, you know, essentially trading, you know, with BTC exposure on their platform. And they're, you know, because they're a WBTC merchant, they're also playing this similar role to CoinList, where they're making WBTC available via the, you know, by mirroring the Bitfinex BTC order books. So ETHFinex, Diversify, now they're called themselves, have got you know, some reserves of BTC and WBTC that they're using to bridge liquidity between these two exchanges. So there's actually already deeper WBTC liquidity available on DEXs than you would expect, thanks to them. And lastly, I think it's worth mentioning that DYDX is launching this BTC perpetual swap product, which is, you know, firstly a step forward in people trading Bitcoin type products on DEXs, and secondly, you know, provides a venue where traders will be able to hedge BTC exposure if they're kind of stuck in a you know, somewhere in this loop, right? Because you can actually go short BTC with, you know, with up to 10x leverage on DYDX, for example, while you're holding that that WBTC that you've liquidated, and you're still trying to do this full loop. So that's kind of interesting, and something that, you know, you've never been able to do before.
I feel like it's worth noting as well, like we can have different auction parameters for like BTC vaults as well, right? So we could extend the times and things specifically for those if we thought that would work better.
Yeah, that's true. I think in general, like it's very wise to think about things like total round trip redemption time, confirmation times, potentially on other blockchains in this case, when thinking about auction parameters, because you really have to imagine the worst case scenario where essentially, you know, all liquidity and financing have dried up, and you have to have participants be able to do a full cycle.
I mean, I just want to add that adding USDC as a collateral type greatly helps in those stressful times, right? The biggest issue was, in my mind, converting USDC to DAI. And, you know, now that you're not stressing the Coinbase market, just minting it will alleviate a lot of the problems we were seeing.
Sounds like maybe that's unless anyone has anything to add, that's maybe a good point to end that segment. Maybe we should move on.
Look at you stepping into your new potential role. I was just about to do the same thing. Thanks, man. Let's figure out next steps though before we simply just change the subject. Lev has helpfully put out a forum thread to discuss WBTC, the concerns, questions, and compliments that WBTC received in this conversation should be reflected there as well, so we can all internalize it over a longer time frame. And then let's do a callback to what I talked about at the top of the hour. Let's figure out how we get from intention to implementation. So obviously there's issues that need to be addressed that I ham-fistedly tried to raise earlier about recourse, redemption, auction keepers. That's the first little rabbit hole we went down. I am willing to bet there are more rabbit holes that need to be addressed. So let's make sure that we treat this as a project and that the stakeholders have been identified, that we understand the implications, and that there's a plan to make it happen if that's what the people want. So please join the forum and comment on Lev's thread. Vishesh, time to wake up and give us the state of the pegs if you're still around. You got something for us today?
Okay. All right, I'll share my screen.
Any bets on state of the battery before he shares? I think.
Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. 48.
All right. So just to kind of start off with the dye supply. So basically what we saw coming out of sort of all the crazy liquidation events was a huge haircut in the ETH dye supply. And then basically since March 19th to April 7th, we saw that dye supply steadily starting to increase. So in that same time frame, we saw that elevated dye price coming down from, you know, say $1.10, $1.07, $1.04, and then steadily to like $1.01. And then basically around April 8th, there was a sudden dip of a couple million in the dye supply. And then there was like, it was very flat. There was not much new minting going on during that time. And basically this corresponded to ETH price sort of being flat and increasing slightly to basically having a sudden jump on the 7th. And then post that sudden jump, dye basically kind of froze in terms of minting activity. It was a bit of a holding pattern. Well, so what that led to was basically as that ETH price came up, and there was, you know, some potential concern that it would come back down. I think a lot of people took that, you know, $1-ish dye price as an opportunity to start to pay down some debt, and basically that led to a dip in the dye supply that I showed you. So what happened then was because ETH for a few days was actually kind of flat, that dye price was holding at around $1.02 because there weren't new people coming in and minting new dye or market making, you know, dye reserves that they were sitting on, because a lot of people had been cleared out through, you know, all the crazy crash events. And so what had kind of happened was this dye price was sitting around $1.02 for, if you think about it in the grand scheme of things, about 8 days. Now that presented a lot of concerns for a lot of people, but what's interesting to note is in the last few days, you know, the average price, though some trades were still happening at elevated prices, the average price was coming down very slightly, you know, about another cent or so. Obviously there was some, you know, high trades on Oasis today, but if you look at the current, you know, DYDX order books, DAI is trading at, you know, around $1, $1.50. So, you know, basically this freeze in the reduction of the peg kind of was pretty well explainable. Now, in terms of what happens from here with ETH price sort of continuing to increase, remains to be seen. Like I said, you know, DAI is very sensitive to movements in ETH price, and pretty much everything that's been happening with DAI can be pretty well explained by, obviously, you know, reductions in reserves, obviously some uncertainty in terms of market making capabilities, though that's at this point, I think, pretty well explained by market conditions as opposed to like endogenous system risk. So that's just something I would be mindful of, is that a lot of what appears to be going on here is due to external market factors impacting this, time-sensitive sentiment on leverage. But that DAI supply, though it took that sharp drop, does appear to be trending upward in the last couple of days as well. So that's just something for us to watch. Overall, it's up to 86 million DAI from ETH. And if you compare that to what we were looking at, say a week ago or a couple of weeks ago, basically the same value, that's up about 10 million. So that's just something to watch. It does appear to be loosening up, which I think is a very positive indicator, especially for people that are severely concerned about the peg just sort of perpetually staying up. Obviously, it's potentially more difficult for DAI to move from $1.04 back down to $1.02, and then back down to $1 versus going from $1 back to precisely $1. So in terms of expectations for further decrease in the peg, I think it's not necessarily a linear trend, but it does appear to have loosened up a bit. So I think that's a positive indicator. Yeah, I don't want to belabor too much, but this graph is good context in terms of how things were performing for a while, insane events occurring, and then sort of still kind of a slight trend downward toward normalization. And then as far as like more granular normalization and what happens in the next 3 or 4 days, I think will be really important data points. But if this sort of supply increase does continue to trend, and if the peg does sort of continue to trade at this level or potentially lower, those would be very positive indicators, I think, for DAI. Okay, I'll stop there. Pause for questions.
Vishesh, what's your opinion of the current Ether debt ceiling? I think we're all good there, or perhaps an increase in order?
So debt ceiling is, I think, a really important parameter to talk about. The buffer in the debt ceiling is important to manage. So right now, the ETH debt ceiling is, and this is not a new conversation. The ETH debt ceiling is 90 million. There's currently 86 million DAI from ETH. As far as the likelihood of hitting 90 at the current rate, I mean, it does appear that trend could continue and you could hit that ceiling. So obviously, potentially some increase is worth talking about. But the conversation has been had, many times in this conference call around how to programmatically maintain that buffer, and just the general point rather than the specific point that I'll make is you want to obviously maintain a little bit of slack so that you don't hit that debt ceiling, but you don't want to maintain so much of a buffer room that it presents additional risks, because there are definitely very clear conditions that you can model where, say, another ETH price crash happened, you wouldn't want to have an excess 30 million debt ceiling buffer potentially, because there are scenarios in which that can lead to further losses. So it's just something to balance. As always, you want to keep some room, but not too much room. And I think the conversation and many forum polls were had in the past around what exact programmatic buffer to maintain. So that's not something that like I'll just be able to decide here.
Feels like it should probably come up a bit, given that we're like 4 million or something off.
Yeah, it is close, that's for sure. We're in spitting distance, as I like to say.
Actually, Vishesh, are you kind of against upping it at least 5 million or something? Or I don't know. I'm just trying to understand reasoning. I understand the comments. It's like, I think a number of people are like, well, maybe we should up it a little bit. I mean, 5 minimum, I think. But I don't know. I understand the comments. I just don't understand what your opinion is. Should we up it a little or no?
Yeah, I don't think increasing the debt ceiling by 5 million at this point for ETH DAI is a significant risk. But the broader point that I was making is, rather than making specific one-off determinations about whether to increase the debt ceiling, there were already conversations that had been had around what is the rough percentage or nominal number to maintain as a debt ceiling buffer. And I think that type of system management is more manageable. But yeah, in terms of your specific question, is increasing it by 5 million at this point a bad idea? No, I don't think it adds significant risk. And I think you are within striking distance of the current debt ceiling. So there are definitely, reasonable arguments to be made for increasing that.
Okay, I'm just wondering if there's an actionable item here. I'm thinking like Rich. And so I think at some point we're going to hit it unless we get a market downturn, then we don't have to worry about it. But I guess, hearing the opinion we could do 5 million wouldn't bother you. I think we should do it. Given the fact that we're kind of hunting around for DAI liquidity, I'd rather not get pegged on the DC limit on F and be stuck with USDC at, 6% and BAT, which nobody's touching. So I don't know, just opinion.
It feels like if we're going to do a bunch of changes on Friday to like hopefully increase the amount of DAI minted, we should probably up that ceiling at the same time, right? Like more than 5 million, like 10 million, I would like one, I think.
Yeah, and let me echo a point for Vishesh, right? I think what he's saying is we should kind of decide what kind of buffer we want, and then we can decide how to manage it. I can kind of have my facility usage rate thing, and that thing's designed in such a way that it kind of manages the utilization and the rate that the market is telling you based on that model will give you a clue on whether you need to nudge it up or not, if the markets are overheated, because they'll start moving the rate up on you kind of at the ends of the curve, either up or down, and you can use that as the determining method for should we really up it. And the rate will also limit people from just jamming it right to the peg. So I already posted on this, it's kind of opinion, but I do want to second Vishesh's point, which is we really should just think about what is the comfortable buffer, and probably as a percent of float, and go from there.
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to talk about. It's probably something that needs to go on the forums, sort of be discussed in more detail though. In terms of making a change that's gonna come in quickly, I think we need to consider just picking a number, right? For this week. Does anyone else have thoughts on debt ceiling?
So just as an actionable item, can we, when we get to polls again, can we put up a poll that has raise the DC from 90 to 95 and maybe 100, and leave those as the 2 options, since, Vishesh is kind of I don't want to go any further than 5 really, and just kind of see what poll opinion is on it, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, to be clear, I'm not saying that 10 is a specific problem or 5 is specifically okay. I mean, obviously these are governance questions of what's the precise buffer that you want to maintain. But there are specific questions that are answerable. At 86 million now, is it reasonably likely that you'll hit 90 within a week or 2? I mean, that is reasonably likely based on current trends. Obviously trends could change. ETH could completely change direction tomorrow. And then the other point was okay, once there's a programmatic decision around what kind of a debt ceiling buffer, either on a percentage or a nominal basis that the governance community is comfortable with, then you don't need someone like me to come in and say, okay, well, you should increase it by 5 million now, you should increase it by 10 million now. Those those I think are questions for governance polls. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sounds okay to me. I mean, I'm just wondering if there's an actionable item here. I'm kind of thinking out ahead for Rich and governance, but in general, I agree with your comments, Vishesh. You know, we're kind of on similar pages here.
Yeah, so I'm going to echo something Jekka just said in the side chat, which was that the question right now is whether an increase is urgent enough to include in the executive on Friday without a governance poll, right? So based on the rate of increase, like total DAI minted increase, it's been pretty high over the last few days. To the point where it's like 2.5 million or something yesterday.
I mean, I don't think there's an urgent situation here, in the sense that there's no clear specific problem that I see at the moment. I'm just saying that given the rate of increase, it's potentially likely that you could hit that 90 million within the next week or so, at the current rate. So whether you want to change or break the process in order to account for that, like that's again a bit of a governance question, but like I don't think either way there is a large specific risk there, because at the moment there's not tremendous amounts of financial.
Something that we consider too is that there's a significant number of polls and initiatives and activities that are culminating, culminated in the portal an hour and 20 minutes ago, that were designed to increase liquidity and designed to increase DAI creation. If all of those things work, it would be slightly disheartening to find that it's...
There's some other considerations here as well. So one of the polls, so tomorrow SCD shutdown is being initiated. There is a 3-week delay before it actually goes into effect. So just to be clear, tomorrow the vote goes out, but it doesn't actually happen for 3 weeks. Additionally, the MKR Oracle price feed is being disabled, which is designed to allow feeless migration. And we want migration, we want to incentivize migration to occur without fees, such that the migration contract can be drained, which would otherwise be a burden for the protocol when SCD is actually shut down in 3 weeks. Given that that incentive period starts tomorrow, it's likely that we'll see an uptick in migration from SCD, eating away at that 2.4 million DAI. That in itself would eat up the remaining debt ceiling if that were to happen, which would leave pretty much zero space for fresh DAI generation off of ETH.
Yeah, I mean, given the delay, it makes sense, right, for an increase.
What?
Given the fact that there's a delay involved, then it does make sense for an increase.
Right. So I would say that if we do hit the debt ceiling, we actually might. There's a chance we do run into some problems in terms of the DAI peg. Right. This is not the time that we want to be putting a cap on fresh DAI generation from ETH, especially if we hit a rising market and people want to be minting DAI. I think governance should they should try to make that happen. So that would either look like just a midweek executive vote, actually at this rate, maybe even a mid-weekend, or I don't know how this would work on the governance side, but it certainly would be helpful from a protocol standpoint if we could include a small debt ceiling even in tomorrow's executive vote. But that might be a bridge too far in terms of governance and polling and whatnot.
From my perspective, that seems fine. Like I feel like we've done similar things before, and that's like in this case, I think the arguments are pretty heavily weighted towards wanting it sooner rather than later. And like the whole reason, like we're breaking process to do changes that with the specific goal of increasing like the DAI supply. Like, yeah, it makes sense to do the debt ceiling as well. Like with that, right? Like does anyone
I don't
disagree
know.
and think that's like
I would
out
say
of,
let's just
out
put
of
it up
order?
right now. If anyone's opposed to it, let's hear from them. Otherwise, I think we're all in agreement.
Well, so that's exactly what I think we want to caution against, is that this call historically has not been designed to make decisions on this call, right? This has just mainly been a discussion forum, and this majority of governance happens offline in the forums and stuff. But I still think we should do our best to continue that conversation in the forums, and if possible,
Yeah.
and it may not be possible, but maybe we can try to include this in the executive tomorrow. Sorry, Rich, go ahead.
I agree. We have, I've spoken to this before, we have a very select group of individuals in this call, North Americans that have nothing to do at this particular time of day that all speak English. So we need to be cautious about using this as a decision-making forum. We also, I guess, point out that we have empowered actors in the system. So we have a risk team that's been empowered by the community to be domain experts, and so I think that there's precedence, especially considering that we're still, actually we haven't talked about this in a long time. Potentially we're still in the migration process. SCD still exists. MCD is still on a long road to getting ramped up, and as part of the migration proposal, I think there was some latitude for the risk teams to make decisions that protected the protocol. So there's pros and cons to this thing. Particularly if we have a series of initiatives that are going through, like I said earlier, that are intended to increase liquidity, except we forgot one parameter, which caps liquidity. That's slightly counterproductive. So it's worth considering. So we can talk about it in the forums for sure, and see if there's any. We can try perhaps try the experiment of giving people the opportunity to say no, as opposed to hoping that tons of people show up to say yes. So we can definitely have that as a discussion.
Yeah, I'll put up a forum thread after the call.
It's worth noting that like Maker token holders always have a chance to say no because they can just not vote for the executive. Obviously, bundling kind of destroys that a little bit, but if there's anything they hate
So maybe a
so
bundle
much,
to end all bundles.
yeah, if there's ever anything in a bundle that they hate, like to the point where they cannot accept it, like they can not vote for it. So there's that as well.
Monet Supply points out that supplementary USDC polls were up for less than a day, and that's a great observation. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be reinforcing your point, but here's a data point for you as well, though. Cyrus is making fun of my spelling abilities. The point is that supplemental poll went out in response to the community's intention to increase liquidity by lowering the friction on USDC. And what we actually saw was a 6%, the community signal for a 6% stability fee, which is almost completely counter to the intention for that supplementary poll in the first place. And so there's risks associated with these last minute governance decisions that we need to start internalizing as well. All right, awkward silence potentially. We were getting to that point in the call, but it is, we're 30 minutes into the Q&A session. And I think that there's been a lot to go over. We have a lot to wrap up as well. Like I said, there's 10 polls went through. We have action that presumably the community wants us to take on Friday. So please hit up the forums and join the threads that are in motion so we can make sure that we have as much consensus as is possible with the aggressive timelines that have been presented to us. And I think we'll probably leave it there. Thanks everybody for your presentations. Thanks for your questions. Join the forums and we'll see you next week.